Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Help my heart to hear your sound. Speak into my life, Lord, speak now. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow. Clear my mind, oh Lord, clear my mind. Bring me peace that I cannot find. Take my worried thoughts, break my pride. Clear my mind, oh Lord, clear my mind. Wake my soul, oh Lord, wake my soul. With this mess I made, make me whole. Of this life called mine, take control. Wake my soul, oh Lord, wake my soul. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Help my heart to hear your sound. Speak into my life, Lord, speak now. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down.
Hi, Crosspointe. Thanks for joining us for our virtual-only service this weekend. I hope that you're able to find some rest, some time to reflect maybe today or this long weekend. With the traditional school calendar starting, we're also kicking off a lot of things this fall at Crosspointe. You already may be connected in community somewhere, either at Crosspointe or outside of Crosspointe. We celebrate all of that. Connection with one another is a value that we hold, and we encourage you to find somewhere to do that. We also realize that although we're offering lots of ways to connect, there's really no way that we can find a perfect fit for everyone. So we encourage you to take a look to see if some one of these things works for you and to find connection here if that works for you. And if not, let us know if there's another way we can help you get connected. So a few of the things that are happening. Middle and high school programming is starting up on September 10th in the evening at 6:30. Middle school life groups meet on Sunday evenings at Crosspointe, and high school meets in small groups and large groups at the same time, just in a little bit different space. If you'd like to sign your student up for a middle or high school life group, or just find out more information about what's going on with them, you can do that at crosspointe.org/middle school or crosspointe.org/high school. At the same time, this Sunday, September 10th, at 6:30, parents, while your student is in middle school or high school ministry, we invite you to stay for a night. Head over to the Crosspointe coffee shop for some goodies and really just to meet other parents. There's no need to register for that. Just drop your student off at 6:30 or show up if they're driving themselves and then walk over to the coffee shop. Also to keep in mind is that registration for all Crosspointe groups, they're going to open next week. This fall, we'll have short-term groups, ongoing groups, one-time groups with a range of topics from Bible studies, theological topics, parenting, grief, a whole lot more. You'll be able to find those links online and in the e-news starting next week. One of our new groups that's happening is our community group that we're calling Prime Timers. And this is a group for retirees, for empty nesters, anybody in between. This group will gather for social events, volunteering, and a whole lot more. And we invite you, if you fit within this age range or this demographic, to come to our very first gathering after our in-person service on Sunday, September 17th. We'll eat lunch together, learn more about the group, and put together care packages for our Crosspointe college students. So if you would like to know more or to register, you can go to crosspointe.org/primetimers. And speaking of college students, many of our college students are back to school, either nearby or far away. And we want to remind them that they're loved and they're thought about. So we're putting together care packages for them and invite you to donate items to those boxes. If you're a parent of a college student or a guardian and would like your student to receive a care package, we need their contact information so we can actually send it to them. You can sign up to donate items. You can give us your student's information at crosspointe.org/youngadults, and you'll see the links to do that there. Two other really important things coming up. We all know, and we talk about this a lot at Crosspointe, we know that there's an affordable housing crisis all across the country, and specifically to our area. We get call after call after call every single week about the need for rental assistance and mortgage assistance and people just finding places to live that's affordable. We also know that a lot of our hardworking people and our community members, our teachers and our social workers and our police officers, they simply can't afford to live where they work. And we work hard to advocate for affordable housing in Wake County. We also are very aware that there's a history of racist government policies that has had a big hand in the housing inequity that we see today. And as people of faith, we feel that we're called to educate ourselves about past and current injustices so that we can use our voices and hands and feet to make change. We believe that that's part of living out the just and loving way of Jesus. So there's an amazing opportunity to attend a race and housing dialogue on September 19th at 6:30 p.m. It's being hosted by Crosspointe, Cary First Christian Church, and Habitat for Humanity Wake. The event is actually going to be held at Cary First Christian Church, who's doing some amazing work with affordable housing in our area. During the evening, we'll view a documentary, we'll have some discussion, then we'll learn some practical info and steps about what's happening in our areas around issues of affordable housing. I've attended an event in the past for this, and I've found it to be incredibly eye-opening and meaningful. So I invite you to attend. You can register at crosspointe.org under our main page and under the sign that says Segregated by Design. Lastly, Crosspointe is always seeking ways to support our community, and we'll be hosting a booth at Durham Pride on September 23rd. We need volunteers to help at that booth throughout the day, to pass out goodies, and to just be a generally nice, welcoming person, and to enjoy the event. So if you'd like to do that, you can sign up at the link on our main page at crosspointe.org or crosspointe.org/events/support Durham Pride. We also want to thank you for all the ways that you continue to show up in the world as loving, caring individuals. Thank you for being a part of these amazing things we get to do together as a community. We absolutely couldn't do it without you. It wouldn't be possible without your time, without your energy, without your financial support. If you'd like to support the work of Crosspointe financially, you can do that at crosspointe.org/contribute. And on that page, you'll find a multitude of ways to donate. Crosspointe, incredibly grateful for you, incredibly grateful for the work that we do in the world. And I hope that you have a good, restful week. Thanks.
So there's this verse that we find in the Bible that tends to keep messing with me. It pushes on me and it invites me into something that I'm not really comfortable with, even though I think it's really healthy. Now, obviously people can take all sorts of biblical verses out of their context and make that same claim. And we see that all the time, right? They take verses out of their context, they weaponize them against people or claim, well, see, the Bible says it right here, so that shuts down any further conversation. If you're new around our community, that's not something we practice here. We don't believe that's a role that the Bible as a whole or any particular verse in the Bible was or is ever intended to serve. Yet, still this one verse keeps messing with me. Probably because of the very context behind it. But maybe rather than simply seeing this as a verse to be blindly submitted to, maybe it's just better to consider and wrestle with what it highlights about us, what it confronts us with, and what, if anything, you and I can learn from it together as a community. So back a few thousand years ago, it was written that God said this to God's people in Exodus chapter 34, verse 21, 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. Now, prior to this point, this idea of resting on the seventh day of the week, the seventh day technically being Saturday on the calendar because Sunday was and is viewed technically as the first day of the week. This idea of resting on the seventh day was just part of the ancient Hebrew culture from their very origins. We read in the origin story in Genesis about how in the beginning God did the work of creation for 6 days, but then on the seventh day, God rested and made that time holy. It was a sacred rhythm designed into the fabric of the entire created order. Then later on in the book of Exodus, we find the 10 Commandments, with one of them being this very same idea that 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you will rest. You and anyone you're responsible for, all of you shall rest. It was this discipline that served as a reminder that one's value and worth are not ultimately from what you produce. This habit, this practice, that was intended to align one again with the very rhythms baked into the universe from the beginning. And yet, if we're honest, this is probably the one out of the 10 Commandments we take the least seriously as a culture today, right? It's the one that's easiest to find excuses to ignore and to justify why we ignore it. And frankly, for most of us, we rarely even think about it. It's just not on our radar most of the time. And it's that reality that helps make what we read here in Exodus 34 something that I think is worth allowing ourselves to be confronted with. Where again, it says, 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Now, that's the same idea we see previously, right? It's the same idea we see in the origin story that we find in Genesis. It's the same idea we see with the handing down of the 10 Commandments earlier in the book of Exodus chapter 20. But here in Exodus 34, some more time has passed. And so something gets added on. 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. Now, from a cultural context standpoint, this is being written to people who made their living predominantly through agriculture. It's how they fed their family. It's how they bartered. It's how they survived. So So because most of us listening to this primarily don't make our living in an agricultural context, it's easy to simply skim over this addition. Yet, I think it's important for us to understand that what is true now and in agricultural-driven communities around the globe is what was also true then. That when you're in plowing or harvest season, when you have good weather during those seasons, there is an intense pressure to make the most of every day because both seasons can end up being a fairly small window of time. Because again, in an agricultural context, making the most of plowing and harvest seasons feels like a matter of survival. It doesn't feel like you can risk slowing down for any moment when there's a possibility of necessary work being able to be done. And so, it makes sense that the Hebrew people embraced the idea of Sabbath as one of the 10 commandments, but then life happened, right? There were times and seasons when the competition for time became much more intense, where other priorities took precedent. 1 week because of the time crunch, and it was just easy to justify, but then that 1 week turned into 2 weeks, and 2 weeks turned into several weeks, and suddenly the ripple effects of getting off rhythm affected entire households and communities. So much so that when this idea gets revisited in their sacred communal writings later on, suddenly there's an additional instruction. 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. Now here's the thing. What was true of people thousands of years ago is true of us today, right? And it becomes very easy to justify our reasoning where our typical default is to simply just try to push through those kinds of seasons without pausing, without resting, without prioritizing our own mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, because after all, there's things that have to be done. But still, for most of us in our specific community, our seasons probably won't be harvest and plowing season. It'll be something else. It's this season of raising young kids or raising teenagers or young adults, or the end of the fiscal year, or a difficult time of leadership or employee transition, or the holiday season, or an election season, or back to school season, or sports band or dance season. It's going to be a time when repairs to your home or car starts to pile up, a time when you're stressed about finances. It'll be a time of emotional or physical health challenges for you, for someone that you care about and help take care of, a time when your heart is overwhelmed with the grief and pain of injustices going on in the world. And the thing is, often we're acutely aware of our need to rest. We feel it. But what we say to ourselves is, well, this is just a season. And once this quarter slows down, once we hire some more people, once this craziness passes, then I'll slow down some. And yet time and time again, what we know from experience is that once that season passes, another season is already stacked on top of it. So this ancient divine instruction confronts us. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. You must rest. Now, it's not you must rest because you're going to offend God somehow if you don't, because you're violating some religious rule if you don't. It's because this is what is healthy and best for us. And deep down, we already know that, right? We hear that and it resonates as true. But it's also frightening for many of us because it requires us to say no to some very compelling and loud voices inside our own head. Voices like the one that would accuse us of being lazy if we slowed down. For some of us, based on the context of how we were raised or the circumstances of our life, one of the last things we'd ever want to be accused of is being lazy. So the idea of stopping, the idea of turning off producing in some way feels incredibly threatening. And the idea of saying no to that voice, it's scary. Because the reality is, the idea of doing more seems holy. Doing less doesn't feel holy. Doing more does. And so that voice gets loud, and yet there it is, right in the 10 Commandments. In much the same way, for others of us, it can require us to say no to that persistent voice inside of us that keeps insisting, everything just depends on me. If I slow down, if I let up, if I stop, this whole thing, this whole project, this whole company, this whole family is going to fall apart. I'm responsible for holding it all together. still for more of us. It can require us to say no to the voice in us that tries to guilt us into believing that we have to constantly be informed about everything going on in the world all the time. After all, how can we be people who care about the pains and injustices of the world if we don't allow ourselves to be instantly informed by the news and by social media? How will we feed our addiction to anger if we're not letting ourselves be updated every moment to the latest disgusting thing those people or that person said or did? How will we know what to talk about in our circles of people if we're not constantly in the loop on the latest? Because again, we can't risk being viewed as uninformed or uncaring about the challenges facing the world, right? That seems unintelligent. That seems unconcerned. That seems unloving. And then there can be another voice that sounds like, just keep running, keep busy, keep taking in information, keep taking in distractions, keep the TV rolling, keep the podcast playing, keep working, whatever you do, just keep running. Because if you don't, if you stop, if you just let yourself be in a moment of time, you might actually find yourself having to feel some things. You may find yourself starting to tear up without really knowing why. You may find yourself remembering someone or feeling the regret or disappointment of something that happened a week ago or 5 years ago, when the voice inside says, you don't want to face that. You don't want to deal with that. It's better just to avoid all that. Just stay numb. That's too hard, too much to deal with. So just ignore it and stay busy. And the thing is, those are all voices that are tremendously hard to say no to. And yet this ancient wisdom still compels us. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. And that requires courage. And perhaps more courage today than in any other time in our history, when we are more connected than we have ever been and have nearly instantaneous access to nearly everyone's lives, experiences, and heartache across the globe at a moment's notice in our pocket. And the thing is, I just don't think our capacity has evolved nearly as fast as our technology has evolved for our hearts to carry all that in any sort of healthy way. So perhaps this is something worth taking seriously, that even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. After all, Jesus took it seriously. We see this throughout his life in numerous places in the New Testament, where he regularly made himself unreachable and unavailable. Where he stopped to rest, he walked away from people asking for help. And we don't view that as a sign of weakness, or that Jesus was rude, or that Jesus couldn't hack it. Rather, we look at it as wisdom, as necessary. So here's the thing I want to leave with you today. I want to invite all of us to have the courage to say no to the voices in our head that convince us that we can't stop, or pause, or rest, or be still. That we can't make ourselves unavailable or be uninformed about the latest happenings in the world. What would it look like to have the courage to say no to those voices, so that you can say yes to you, to your health, to the health of your own mind and heart and soul and inner world? Because again, I don't think it's because any of us would argue that it's not healthy for us to do so, that it's not best for us to do so. And then on top of that, we can't even argue that it's not a primary theme in the Bible, because we find it right there in the foundational 10 commandments of the Hebrew Scriptures, and we find it modeled and practiced consistently in the life of Jesus. And so it comes down to, will we have the courage to say no to the dissenting voices in our head and try? And maybe it feels completely unrealistic to try for an entire day. Listen, I get that. Frankly, I'm not good at that. But what would it look like to try for a few hours? For an hour? For 15 minutes? What would it look like for you and I to push through the fears and trust the benefits of what this could potentially do for our own hearts and minds, to really consider what it looks like to turn off for just a bit, to pay attention to our own inner worlds and nurture them, to participate in what is genuinely life-giving and not merely life-distracting, and to practice that. even for just 1 minute. I'm not sure what that looks like for you. And to offer a list of suggestions may simply feel like another burdensome checklist of to-dos just with some spiritual veneer placed on top of it, and I don't have any desire to do that. But I do think we know when we're intentional about trying to practice the value and heart behind the idea of Sabbath. And so my hope is that we muster up the courage to find a way to practice it. Somehow, some way, for some intentional period of time, especially when we feel like that there's just no realistic way that we can. Trusting that even during the plowing season and harvest, we must rest. Your loved Crosspointe. See you next week.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.